Hey, what's going on? Thank you for tuning into episode 104 of the While We Were Working show. And what does 104 mean? That means it's been 2 full years of episodes powered by the Jumpstart team. Of course, side by side with my awesome co-host, Summer Ketron, who's here again today. And also a thank you to all of guest hosts, members of our team who have contributed to the success and longevity of our show. We're super thrilled, and thank you, community, for continuing to listen, support, and share the work that we're doing here at While We Were Working. Wait, before I jump in though, Summer, do you have any awesome thoughts or memories or favorite episodes, favorite topics that we've talked about on the show so far?
Oh, that's really hard to just pick one, Joey, or a few, because I feel like I get so excited every week about the articles and the questions that we get. But, I think if I was to maybe think of one that really stands out to me, it was when we had Hannah on the show, and she was talking about the work that she was doing kind of out in streets, talking about pay transparency.
So we're going to go all across the country, every single capital city, but then also surrounding areas, showing that discrepancy of pay across the country. I really want to run into some teachers in Idaho, for example.
And I think for me, that's one that I'll never forget because I love the work that she was doing and continues to do. And it's just, I think, a really cool opportunity to have somebody like her on the show.
Yeah, you're talking about Hannah from Salary Transparency, and it was great to see her on the show. Reached out to her, and at that moment in her career, she was famous, but it's even nice to look and see her continuing path and some of the brands she's been able to work with, some of the conversations she's able to have, and she even recently made Forbes 30 under 30 list. So kudos to her and her team for making that happen. And she's a friend of the pod, as podcasters will say. So that definitely was an exciting moment for me too. And then I think anytime we have an opportunity to bring on special guests from some of our partners, like we had Gusto on, Fama.io, Engagely, those were some moments that come to mind. I think with Engagement, we were talking about quiet quitting, and is it a new phenomenon? And so that was a pretty exciting episode to cover. So I think we should jump into our segment called While We Were Working. And Summer, do you want to set it up and share the article that we're talking about today from HR Morning?
Of course, I'd love to. And thanks, Joey. This is an exciting moment for our show to be at our 2-year mark. And thanks, everybody who's joining us today. The While We Were Working segment of our show is where Joey and I take a look at what's happening in the people leaders space. We scour websites, look at blogs, read online newspapers, and really just try to find something that's unique and interesting to talk about on the show. And today's article actually came to us from our friends over at HR Morning. And the article is titled Catfishing Candidates. Employers are still misleading applicants. I must admit, Joey, that title pulled me right on in. And I had to know more. So thrilled to be chatting about this article on today's show.
Yeah, no, this is very much a thing. I think one of the stats that stood out to me from this was 45% of candidates rejected job offers after realizing they were misled. And one of the things we talk about here on the show and with our clients and when we're on platforms is just about how there's so much regrettable turnover that happens in the first, 30 to 60 days. Because candidates feel like what was pitched to me is not reality. And so I am not surprised at this number at all. That represents, half of candidates. Because there's probably deeper reasons for why companies feel like they have to lie or why they are inadvertently lying, but no, I am not surprised at this stat. It is an issue that we need to work on, and the whole idea of catfishing candidates just seems to be odd, because I would imagine your employer brand is at stake, your reputation is at stake. You want to present the reality of what it's like to work there. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the article? What stood out to you?
Yeah. Well, I think the stat that you led us with, Joey, it's definitely staggering. And so if you're following the show and you're like, hold on, wait a minute, what is catfishing? It's, in short, it's a term that's come up in the recent years. It's essentially pretending to be somebody else online. In fact, the article references that there's even a whole TV show that focuses on catfishing. And so, when I think about the idea, right, as I'm familiar with it, like from the show and just from the concept, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, please tell me employers aren't doing this. Finding out that they are is really concerning. And, yes, the Greenhouse survey was from the 2022 candidate interviews, and I think it was a little bit of a different time, right? We'll take a quick glimpse back. That's when for part of the year, it was still a very competitive space in terms of competing for talent. And I can't help but guess that companies may have been so desperate to secure talent that they stretched the truth more than a little bit about their employee culture. And unfortunately, or fortunately, those candidates found out.
Yeah, and good on them good on them as a candidate for making that call to not reward bad boss behavior by not believing the lie, right? So you mentioned the stats from 2022, but then there were additional stats from the article about what does it say? 22% reported working in roles that didn't match the description given during hiring. 42% accepted jobs with more responsibilities than initially stated. We see that sometimes where we might say, oh, someone's coming in as an assistant, but really they're a manager, or they're coming in as a manager, but they really are a director. And then 36% of candidates ghosted an employer after realizing the deceit. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and this is within the backdrop of recruiters, whether they be at employers or looking as outside partners. We saw, unfortunately, a lot of layoffs. So it's like the situation was able to get worse because the people who would help do something about it, they weren't around the scene as much as maybe in years prior. So it's just a big cluster happening, and we've got to be aware of it. We've got to know the impact that it has on our businesses if we do betray the trust of candidates, and figure out what to do next.
Yes, and when I was reflecting on this and thinking about the work that we do at Jumpstart and how we can help organizations not fall into, kind of this or a similar situation, one of the key components is truly having updated and accurate job descriptions. And I think that's something that's often overlooked because perhaps they were created at one point in time. Yes, they may have changed a little, but, the idea is, hey, let's just keep them vague, and, we'll put all of those, those duties that may change in that, nice bullet our HR community loves, which is all other duties as assigned. And while that's
right.
Okay, it's not intended, right, to truly be that catch-all of things that are important, relevant, and major functions of the job. So if you're listening to our pod and you're maybe thinking, gosh, we don't have job descriptions, or we have them, they really need updating, but nobody has the time, give us a ring. We love to work on job descriptions, and help organizations with their recruiting and or recruiting strategy as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you mentioned it from the recruiting strategy perspective, since that's the top of the conversation. Well, we're also in that season of performance management, right? Where it's important to ensure that people are doing the jobs that they've been hired on to do, and also that they know what the wins are for their position. So there's definitely a dual nature, a dual reason for needing those job descriptions updated. All right, so I think that we are good on. Oh no, there's another piece I wanted to mention. You mentioned job descriptions, and I know that artificial intelligence is a big, big, big thing. Matter of fact, my TEDx talk on using AI at work just went live, and we'll drop a link to that in the show notes. But but one thing that people can do as a misstep and that can contribute to the miscommunication is pulling a job description from AI, but not tweaking it so that it is accurately representing the work and work environment of your organization. Because if you ask a AI tool, say, "Hey, I need a job description for finance manager. I need a job description for um, AWS engineer," it's gonna give you something. But if all of those bullet points aren't accurate and true and reflective of your culture, reflective of your organization, then that's just going to put a deeper divide between you and the candidate's expectations, because the job description may be a complete one, but it's not a real one. And so all the more reason to make sure that you are reviewing your job descriptions so that they are accurate and not falling into the trap of thinking that AI can solve your problems all by itself.
Yes, that's so true, Joey. And if I can add just one thing to that you got me thinking about is also using AI for not just job descriptions, but for job postings, right? Because sometimes companies just drop their job description into a job advertisement. And the first thing that I think about is if you're using, for the most part, something that's right out of AI, and others are too, now how are you going to stand apart, right? So really thinking about how do you write your job postings so that they are unique, enticing, and reflect why you'd be the employer of choice.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing, everybody's using the tools. So the competitive edge really has to be in articulating the culture, values, and making sure that those bullet points, again, are accurate, they're real. If you've got to lift boxes, the job ad might say you lift 50 pounds, but if you're really only lifting 20 pounds, it should say that. If you are managing a team of people, the job description says you're managing 14 people, but you're really managing 5, it should say that. If you're, hybrid environment or a remote environment, but the job description is for someone who's in office 5 days a week, you should say that. So all of these things are ways that AI could get you going, but you have to go back and complete the work, so to speak.
That's right. So I think the overarching message here, kind of putting a bow on this one, Joey, going back to our article, is if your employer who's currently recruiting or recruiting in the future, ensuring that you are describing your company and the position accurately is indeed super important. And, if you're a company that maybe doesn't have the greatest culture today, it's okay to communicate that to your candidates and leave it up to them to decide if that's something that they're willing to be part of rebuilding. Because the last thing you want to do is have somebody join and there's a giant disconnect between what's been described and the environment that they found themselves in. So that's my summary, Joey, of this article. And hopefully we don't see any of this in the future.
Yeah, definitely not here at Jumpstart and not with our clients. So let's end the catfishing and just leave it to the pros at MTV who have the show. I watched that show. Gosh, I mean it's years old now, but it's crazy. Catfishing is just this crazy concept. I won't go down the rabbit trail, but great article from HR Dive. Let's see who was the author on that one. Want to give a shout out to Allison Roller. Allison Roller is the author of that one. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about our consultants quarter. And this is a issue that happens quite a bit, whether a person's in person or not. But we got a question from one of our clients. It said, we've had an issue with remote employees not returning their laptop when they terminate. What are our options to get it back? So, Summer, can they call the SWAT team to do a sting operation and get this laptop back from somebody's possession? What are some of the things that they should think about doing?
Oh my, Joey. Well, I suppose they could, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it. I mean, this has been a really sensitive topic, and I've seen this come up more. And, again, I try to always take a moment, reflect, and try to think of possibilities of like, wow, like why is something happening now more than it did, say, just 5 years ago or prior? And I do think it just, one, simply has to do with there are more team members working remotely than there has been in the past, right? So just the likelihood is it's more likely to happen. But I also think that part of it has to do with the depth of relationships that we're building, right? So when you interact with individuals more in person, you do build a different connection than you do if, say, you've never met them in person or you rarely meet them in person. And team members who may be inclined to, let's just say, keep their equipment intentionally may feel less of a connection with their employer and or their manager and their company, to the point to where they're kind of like, you know what, I don't really care, I'm going to keep it. So I think there's a lot of factors here, Joey. And when it comes to team members not returning equipment, I think the first thing companies need to think about is, one, what is the value of the equipment? Not only the physical value, but the value of the contents that may be stored if it's physically on a device. And then the second thing is, kind of looking at what state that team member is in and reviewing the specific laws of that state and what their available options are. Joey, have you ever had companies say, oh, well, we're just going to deduct it out of their final check, or we're going to hold their final check until they return it?
I've heard some companies attempting to do that. I don't know that that's the best thing to do. Yeah, I've heard them attempt to do that as almost like a corporate blackmail kind of thing. Like, we're going to keep your check if you don't give us our device.
Yeah. And that's sometimes, I think, the first thing that companies think of. And, if I'm having a conversation with them, of course, I'm like, okay, hold on, pause. Let's first look at what our other available options are. And, if they're really adamant that they want to go down that path, I think, we have to explore everything from a compliance standpoint to determine if that's even an option. But even if it is, it's typically not a good one. Now, I'm curious, Joey, have you ever worked with a client who has had this type of issue?
Oh, yeah. We had a client a couple of years ago where I was based in the U.S. But the owner of this business split a lot of their time between the various multinational branches of the organization. And so sometimes there would be the need to terminate an employee, collect materials, deliver it to the client site. And it's easier for me to hop on a US flight than for the owner to hop on an international flight. And so there are times where I remember, going to people's houses and telling the Uber driver, I'm like, hey, look, I'm here to do something that's not so great. I have to collect company property. Can you just, be a witness? And if something crazy happens, call 911. Thankfully, we never had to call 911. But yes, I've been in a position where I've had to collect the material, return it back to the client, and hop on a flight and head back home. Thankfully, folks have been pretty agreeable about the return of property. But of course, they're not always agreeable with the separation of employers. So sometimes you have to manage that tension. But I think there are some cost-effective solutions for getting company property back. And today, with technology, you can send self-addressed boxes or return labels. You can actually now in many locations hire or call an Uber for a courier service to show up to a place and take it to a FedEx or UPS or a postal service. So there are options out there for making that process a little less intrusive. But yeah, I've had my share of you got to mail this laptop back, you got to mail this phone back, this access card, name badge, all those sorts of things. Like Pokemon, I've had to collect them all.
That's a really interesting story, Joey. I actually haven't had to do a collection like you have, but I have worked with clients, and recently they've kind of taken a slightly different approach to this than maybe what I would have seen in the past, which is like a more firm approach in collecting the equipment. So some companies that I've worked with have changed their policies to where now they provide a stipend to provide a device. It's that team member's device when they leave. It's just really important, of course, that when they're performing the work, that everything's stored on the cloud, and that that to a certain degree removes that concern or challenge with collecting equipment. I also have other clients who have a set period of time. I think it's about 3 years, to where once a team member has worked on a device for 3 years, it's theirs to keep. So when team members leave, they kind of make that call. It's like, okay, well, what's the cost to get this equipment returned versus the kind of usable life of it? And if they decide like, well, it's really not going to be redeployed, then like, why even spend the money to have it returned to just keep it? So I think in that regard, some companies are taking different approaches, but in organizations where they really want to push forward with a team member who has not returned their equipment, generally the process is, to first send a reminder, right? Then a slightly firmer request, then perhaps a certified letter that says, if you do not return it, then we will be taking you to small claims court, right? But then is the company then going to actually spend the time and money to complete that filing, let alone, even if you're awarded in your favor in small claims court, there's no guarantee that you're ever going to get that money. So more often than not, when companies understand like the time versus there's no guarantee of a reward, they typically just say, you know what, let's just write it off and call it, call it done.
I think, I always like to think about situations like this, like how do we get there? How did we get here? And what things can we do next time to prevent this? And I think there's a few helpful solutions that companies can think about on the front end. You mentioned the great one is just to provide that stipend, to think about the shelf life tech, considering it. the employee's property after a certain time, but also making sure that you have policies around device utilization, making sure it's clear that employees know what is required upon separation with the organization. I also think it would be a good idea to work with whether it's a managed IT partner. We've got a partner that we work with called Electric, who's a good source for managed IT, or internal IT to set up, a way for there to be remote device wiping and remote access, so that you're able to at least secure the data and confidentiality of the data that's on a device, and to track it as well, making sure that you know where the device is, and making sure it's just not like sold to someone else, whether it's put on Facebook Marketplace or a cash deal somewhere else, just because that could be another thing to consider as well. So these are things to think about on the front end before you ever have to run into the challenges of tracking down a device.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of considerations, and if there's anything I've learned, it is important to have those policies, and it's also important to evaluate each situation on a case-by-case basis. We talked a little bit earlier on about, there may be some states where you can have an authorization signed in advance that if the equipment is not returned, that the employee agrees to have the residual cost deducted from their final pay. But that is, something that you really want to evaluate carefully, because it may sound quite simple on the surface, but there's actually a lot of little nuances and considerations. And, really just to think about what is going to work best for your team, for your business, and weighing the cost versus benefit of of such situation. There's really no simple answer.
No simple answer, and that's why, don't go at it alone. We're a team here at Jumpstart that provides support for businesses navigating these challenges. Especially in this season where we are now of layoffs, reductions in force, and companies having to think through these challenges at a greater scale and speed than typical. So, check out our website, jumpstart-hr.com. You can reach out with a free 15-minute consultation. Happy to chat with you to see how we can be of service and help you sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that you've got a plan in place and our team is actively working to support you. So, don't go at it alone. It's a lot to think about. There are a lot of alternative things that can happen. So we want to help you be protected and have peace of mind about your HR strategy here. So don't hesitate to reach out. And I think that about wraps up our episode 104, our 2-year anniversary episode, talking about stuff we love, catfishing, and getting company laptops back. But we've got a growing catalog of HR topics for you as HR professional or you as a non-HR pro who handles HR. You also check out our podcast, check out our YouTube channel, the Jumpstart HR YouTube channel. And until next time, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Joey. Thanks, everyone.
All right.